So as I went through and I said there were multiple ideas. I'm sorry, I'm getting back down to. So the first thing was, as the disciples said, we only have 5 loaves and 2 fish. So they're telling Jesus, look, we tried, and this is all we got. So we fell short. So the good news in Jesus' eyes is that they tried. Okay, good job. All right, you fell short. What's plan B? And now it goes back to the disciples. Disciples look at Jesus. So he said, okay, fine. Come on, let's get to the end of the story. Bring them to me. And he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. Point 2, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. He understands where the food is going to come from. The disciples didn't have a clue. And that was their shortcoming. They had not yet gotten to the point where they realized they can perform the miracles. They could have done this. Jesus took it on himself and said, okay, fine. Not this time, maybe next time, so I'll do it now. And he prayed to heaven because he knew the source was from above, not from him. He was doing miracles, but the miracles were a performance from the ability that God gives him. Then he broke the loaves, gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. 5 loaves, 2 fish, they all ate, were satisfied. And they took up the 12 baskets full of broken pieces left over. They took the 12 pieces. Now we say, we've heard something very similar to this before. We say 12 baskets, and we look back, and we say the whole idea, there's a story inside the story. The story, we were wandering and roaming, and then food appeared. Everybody complained we're hungry. Well, the disciples complained. We're hungry, and someone provided manna and quail. We all went back and said, Old Testament. The Jews wandering in the desert got to the point, what do we do? And God said, look, do this, do this, do this. I will supply you with bread and fowl. And you can eat, or poultry. And you can eat. And they did. And they were satisfied for a while. And then they say, yeah, but God, now we want pepperoni pizza. They started to make new demands. But we won't go to that part. We'll go to the part where they got enough to be satisfied. The 12 baskets in our head represents the 12 tribes. God and Jesus are telling us the story saying is that when we say all are satisfied, we're not just referencing the people that are sitting here on this hill. We're talking about everybody. If you come to my meal, my kingdom, everyone in the 12 tribes will be satisfied. So it's just not about the food. But I go from the Old Testament, blast through the Gospels, and go all the way to the end of the book and say, what is another story? And that story is this a prequel to a banquet in heaven? Because in heaven we picture that all our needs will be satisfied. Now, it might not be just manna and quail, or it might be something completely different, but we will be satisfied. So we went from an Old Testament, wandering in the desert, to a gospel story about being fed on the side of the hill, to heaven, where all of us are going to get together and gather and be satisfied. So we come back to the middle and say, is this also a prequel to the Last Supper? And is Jesus setting up the story in one of those, I'm telling you once, I'm telling you twice, I'm telling you 3 times. And he's now setting up the picture for the Last Supper, where he breaks the bread and feeds those that are in front of him. Next slide, please, sir. We have to, oh, good. No, I didn't have that one either. All right, so some of the details. The task may be overwhelming, so the disciples, their problem was not what to do or how to do it necessarily. It was the fact that there's a ton of people out here, and all we've got is 5 loaves and 2 fish. So the thing is that it was an overwhelming thing in their head. And I look at that as a pastor when you come to me with a great idea. In your head, it might be overwhelming. There's no way we can pull this off. And I'm saying, well, you're partially right. There's no way you can pull this off. You have skills, you have talents, but maybe you're missing creativity, money, location. You might be missing something. But yes, we can pull this off if we can bring in multiple people to attack the problem. And that's where he was going, is that the task may be overwhelming, but we can pull it off. The secondary thing that's hidden in here is the fact that faith in God brings strength in self. So faith in God brings strength in self. The thing is that we can't do it on our own, but when we bring God into the equation, it gives us something extra where we can pull it off. We can do it, we can accomplish it, but we don't accomplish it on our own. We use and rely on the strength from God. And if I'm lucky, the next one is Matthew 25:26. And it is. Excellent. And it says, surely before dawn, Jesus went out to them, working on the lake. Walking on the lake. So what's happening here is that the same thing has happened. Because the reason the story comes up is it's prefaced by the fact that once everyone was fed and once everything was done, Jesus now said, go to our next stop, take off in the boats, I'm going to stand here and pray. So he did. He stayed behind and everybody else took off. The people went home, the disciples got in the boats and started across the lake. Jesus stayed back to rest. So they've been out late at night and then they hit the boats, they're going out, and it's shortly before dawn, which says it was a fairly lengthy trip, Jesus went to them, the disciples in the boats, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they said, and cried out in fear. So take those things. Walking on the lake, got a miracle going. When they saw him, they were terrified. It's a ghost, and they cried out in fear. So you got fear, you get to walking on the lake. So my first slide should say solitude, and all it should say is deja vu. Because we had the earlier story, the beginning of the story was Jesus went somewhere for solitude to be alone. The beginning of this story, Jesus stayed in order to be alone. So you can see this is not a one-shot deal with Jesus. He does this regularly. Time of meditation, time of prayer. It's something we need to build into our schedules. We need the time of solitude, time of meditation, time of prayer. But then we go into the disciples. The next one should say the cycle. Yes, I'm on a roll. The cycle is fear, belief, and fear. So when they first saw him, he was scared. They were all scared because they saw somebody walking on the water. They said, it's going to be a ghost. Nobody walks on water. But as he got closer, they said, oh, wait a second. That's Jesus. But then they still had fear because they're saying, he's doing something we've never seen before. Is this because, what, did he die? Is he a ghost? So the fear comes back again. So fear, belief, and fear. The whole deal goes through because the next section is when Peter says, I believe in you, so let me walk on water. So there's some fear, then he believes, then he starts to walk. And he starts to sink. The fear comes back. There's that cycle going. Fear, belief, and fear. I'm repeating that for a number of reasons. One, in your life, it's not going to be all of one thing or all of the other. People sit there and say, I've accepted Christ into my heart and I'm now part of the chosen. And all things are going to be great. The answer is wrong. All things aren't going to be great. All things are going to be covered by Christ. There's still going to be bad things that happen. but now you've got somebody else to rely on. And that's the deal with Peter. He got out of the boat, he started to walk because he believed. Then he started to sink because he wasn't strong in the belief. But he reached out, Jesus grabbed his hand, pulled him back up on the water. A bad thing happened, but he could recover from it because he didn't rely on himself, he relied on Christ. And that's where we are in our life. Fear, belief, fear. Belief, fear, belief, fear. But how do we get out of the fear? We rely on God. As I go through this, I reference back, and I don't usually quote from the Psalms in my messages. I'm not sure why. It's probably something I should do more of, so we will, starting today. In Psalm 77, verse 19. Here we are. Your way was through the sea, your path through great waters, yet your footprints were unseen. You led your people like a flock by the hand of Moses and Aaron. Your way was through the sea. In this case, it was a stormy sea. It wasn't perfectly glass-like calm. It's just telling you is that everything won't be perfect. Rely on God. In the reference of the story going through a psalm, it was rely on Aaron and Moses. They were the leaders at their particular time where they were in a, quote, life of misery, which they realized soon was a short life in misery. But the whole idea is that everything isn't perfect. But we, and that we is here, and that we is here, should always get together and get it done. Last slide. That's not a hint that the message is over or anything. Courage is not the freedom from fear. It's the strength to take on the next step. So many people get the picture that, boy, they're courageous. They had no fear. The answer is wrong. They had fear. They understood the fear. But they had the strength and or faith to take the next step, even though we're walking into a miserable situation. They knew who had their back. So courage is not a freedom from fear, it's the strength to take the next step. So in the middle of all that, I referenced the Lord's Supper. And it was done kind of on purpose. One is it made sense, but two is today is our communion day. And what happens in communion is multiple things. One is that we get to come together as a team, as a community, and enjoy the Lord's Supper in a way that we can gain strength from the fact that there are others that are in this with us. But the second is the fact that this is the perfect picture of fear, belief, and fear. Jesus came, Jesus suffered and died, Jesus was resurrected. And we can continue with the cycle is that Jesus doesn't really leave us on our own, but we still have plight and misery, but Jesus is going to come back again. So the cycle that we talk about is built right into the Lord's Supper.